Before Noah's Ark, before the waters swallowed the world, there lived men who walked with God, not as a symbol of closeness, but because they actually heard his voice in a world still echoing with creation's original breath. Instead of receiving prophecy as ink on scrolls, their revelations were passed down through memory, woven into bloodlines and carried in the bones of their descendants. They saw visions of collapse, of angels descending, of giants rising, of humanity drowning in its own corruption. And because they saw what was coming, they spoke, they warned, but the world didn't listen. So who were these ancient seers? What did they witness before the flood washed everything away? And why do their voices still linger thousands of years later in stories we can't seem to forget? Join us today as we uncover the complete saga of the prophets before the Great Flood. If you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like button and subscribing if you haven't already. It helps a lot. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a global community here. So without further ado, let's get started. The world before prophecy. In the beginning, silence stretched across the void like a vast ocean of possibility. No voice had yet spoken. No word had yet shaped reality. The cosmos waited in perfect stillness, holding its breath for the moment when everything would change. Darkness covered the face of the deep. Yet this was not the darkness of emptiness, but the darkness of potential. Like a seed buried in rich soil, all of creation lay hidden within this profound quiet. The Spirit of God moved upon the waters, gentle as morning mist, carrying within itself the blueprint of all that would be. Then came the voice, the first word. Light burst forth with such radiance that darkness retreated to the edges of existence, creating the rhythm of day and night. This was more than illumination. It was the beginning of time itself, the heartbeat of the universe. Waters separated from waters. The firmament stretched like a great dome, dividing the heavens above from the earth below. Dry land emerged from beneath the seas, and the earth put forth grass, herbs yielding seed, fruit trees bearing fruit. Each creation carried within itself the power to multiply, to fill the emptiness with abundance. The sun and moon took their places in the heavens, becoming the great timekeepers. Stars scattered across the night sky like diamonds on velvet, each one a distant flame lighting the cosmic darkness. The earth began to teem with life. Creatures swimming in the depths of the sea, birds soaring through the air, beasts roaming across the land. Yet something was still missing. All of creation functioned in perfect harmony, but there was no consciousness to witness its beauty, no mind to contemplate its wonder, no heart to appreciate its goodness. The stage was set for the greatest act of creation, one that would bridge the gap between the divine and the earthly realms. The cosmos waited, the angels watched. Heaven itself held its breath, for what was about to unfold would change everything. The first chapter of human history was about to begin, and with it would come the first prophecies, the first warnings, the first glimpse of humanity's incredible destiny. In gardens yet to bloom, voices yet to speak would carry messages that would echo through thousands of years. Prophets yet to be born would receive visions that would shape the course of human civilization. The foundations were being laid for a story so profound that its echoes would reach from the beginning of time to the end of days. The world before prophecy was complete. Now came the moment when eternal silence would give way to the first words spoken by mortal lips. The age of revelation was about to dawn, and with it would come both the greatest blessings and the most terrible warnings that humanity would ever receive. Dust and breath, the creation of Adam. The Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground. His hands shaped clay into limbs, sculpted features from earth, breathed purpose into matter. This was no hurried work, but the careful craftsmanship of one who creates with infinite love and attention to detail. Adam lay upon the ground, perfect in form, yet still as stone. Every muscle perfectly placed, every bone precisely positioned, every organ ready to function. Yet he remained motionless, waiting for that final divine touch that would transform earth into life. Then came the breath. The Lord God breathed into Adam's nostrils the breath of life. This was more than oxygen-filling lungs. It was the very essence of the divine entering human flesh. Spirit joined with matter, the eternal connected with the temporal. Heaven touched earth in the most intimate way possible. Adam's eyes opened for the first time. His chest rose and fell with his first breath. His heart began its rhythm that would count out the days of his long life. He blinked, seeing light for the first time, colors flooding his vision with beauty beyond description. The first human consciousness awakened in paradise. Adam found himself surrounded by perfection, trees heavy with fruit, flowers blooming in endless variety, streams of clear water flowing through meadows of soft grass. The air was warm and gentle, carrying the fragrances of countless blossoms. Animals approached without fear. Lions lay down beside lambs. Eagles perched on Adam's shoulders. Deer grazed peacefully nearby. All of creation lived in harmony, violence unknown, death not yet imagined. This was the world as it was meant to be, whole, perfect, complete. Adam walked with God in the cool of the day. Their conversations were easy, natural, filled with wonder and discovery. There were no barriers between them, no shame, no fear. The divine and human communed as close friends, sharing thoughts and dreams and the joy of existence itself. Yet even in paradise, Adam sensed something missing. He watched the animals, each male with his mate, each finding completion in the other. The Lord God saw this longing and said something profound. It is not good for man to be alone. This was the first declaration that creation was incomplete, not flawed, but unfinished. The masterpiece required one final touch, not another creature from the dust, but something drawn from Adam himself. Companionship would come not from outside, but from within, bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. The Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam. As he slept peacefully in the garden, divine surgery was performed. A rib was taken, but not just bone, part of his very essence, his capacity for love, his need for connection. From this intimate part of himself would come his greatest joy and his greatest vulnerability. Adam's sleep was deep and dreamless, yet somehow he knew that when he awakened, everything would be different. The garden would remain the same, but he would no longer experience it alone. Paradise was about to become complete, and with that completion would come both unprecedented joy and unprecedented risk. The stage was set for the next act of creation, one that would introduce both perfect love and the possibility of perfect loss. Adam slept on, unaware that his awakening would change not just his own existence, but the entire course of human history. The first warning, God's only rule. Adam awakened to find paradise unchanged, yet somehow transformed. The same trees stood in their places, the same streams flowed through the garden, the same gentle breeze carried the fragrance of flowers, yet everything felt different, charged with new possibility and deeper meaning. The Lord God walked with him through Eden, showing him wonders beyond counting. Here grew the tree of life, its fruit glowing with inner radiance, promising eternal vigor to all who tasted it. There stood mighty oaks and graceful willows, fruit trees heavy with sweet abundance, herbs that would heal every ailment. From every tree of the garden you may freely eat, God said, his voice carrying both permission and blessing. The words opened up a world of infinite variety. Apples, crisp and sweet, pears that melted on the tongue, grapes that burst with flavor, nuts and berries of every imaginable type. Adam's heart filled with gratitude, such abundance, such generosity. The Creator had prepared a feast that would never end, pleasures that would never grow stale. Every tree was an invitation to joy, every fruit a gift of love. Then came the pause, the gentle hand upon his shoulder, the slight change in tone that made Adam listen more carefully. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. One tree among thousands, one prohibition among countless permissions. The words seemed almost lost among all the generous offerings, yet they carried a weight that pressed upon Adam's spirit like a stone. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Death. Adam had no experience with this concept, yet the words struck him with mysterious dread. He had seen only life in paradise, plants growing, animals thriving, everything flourishing in perfect health. But this warning spoke of something else, something terrible and final. The tree stood before them, beautiful like all the others. Its leaves rustled in the breeze, its bark gleamed in the sunlight. Nothing about its appearance suggested danger, yet the divine warning hung over it like a cloud, marking it as forbidden territory. This was more than a rule. It was humanity's first prophecy. Hidden within the warning lay a vision of the future, a glimpse of what would come if the boundary was crossed. Death would enter paradise. Perfection would shatter. The harmony between heaven and earth would be broken. But why give such a warning? Why place temptation in the midst of blessing? The answer lay in the nature of love itself. True love cannot be forced or programmed. It must choose itself freely, again and again, in the face of alternatives. The forbidden tree was love's test, not a trap designed to ensnare, but an opportunity to demonstrate devotion. Each day Adam walked past it, he had the chance to say yes to God and no to his own desires. Each moment of obedience was a moment of freely chosen fellowship. The warning echoed through the garden, settling into Adam's memory where it would remain forever. One tree forbidden among thousands permitted. One choice that could change everything. One boundary that separated blessing from curse. Adam nodded his understanding, yet could not fully grasp the weight of what had been revealed. This simple rule would become the hinge upon which all of human history would turn. The first prophecy had been given. Now came the question of whether it would be heeded or fulfilled. Bone of my bones, the making of Eve. The deep sleep that fell upon Adam was unlike any rest he had known. Dreams did not visit him, yet somehow his spirit sensed great movement around his still form. Divine hands worked with perfect precision, preparing a gift beyond his wildest imagination. When he awakened, paradise remained the same, yet felt entirely transformed. The same golden light filtered through the leaves, the same gentle stream whispered nearby. But Adam was no longer alone. Before him stood a being of breathtaking beauty, formed from his own substance, yet wonderfully different. "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh," he exclaimed, his voice filled with wonder and recognition. Here was completion he had not known he needed, companionship that answered the deepest longing of his heart. She was like him, yet not like him, familiar yet mysterious, one with him, yet beautifully distinct. Eve opened her eyes to a world of perfect love. Her first sight was Adam's face, radiant with joy and welcome. Her first sensation was belonging, not as a stranger entering foreign territory, but as one coming home to her rightful place. The garden embraced her as naturally as if she had always been there. They walked together through Eden, and Adam delighted in showing her every wonder. Here was the stream where he had drunk cool water, there the tree whose fruit tasted like honey. Each discovery was doubled in joy because it was shared, each beauty magnified because it reflected in another's eyes. Eve brought gifts of her own to their union. Where Adam saw strength, she perceived grace. Where he noticed power, she recognized tenderness. Their different perspectives wove together like threads in a tapestry, creating something more beautiful than either could achieve alone. The animals sensed the completion and came to pay their respects. Lions nuzzled Eve's hand, eagles perched on her shoulder, deer followed her through the meadows. All of creation recognized in her the missing piece that made paradise whole. Peace settled over Eden like evening mist, gentle and all-encompassing. They were naked and felt no shame. This was more than physical exposure. It was complete transparency of heart and soul. No secrets existed between them, no pretense, no fear of judgment. They knew each other fully and loved each other completely, experiencing the perfect intimacy that God intended for humanity. Together they cultivated the garden, tending plants that grew without effort, harvesting fruit that renewed itself endlessly. Work was not toil but joy, each task an opportunity to create beauty and order. Their hands shaped Eden into an even more perfect paradise, guided by wisdom and blessed by divine approval. In the cool of the day, they walked with God as friends walk together. Their conversations were filled with laughter and wonder, questions and discoveries. The Creator shared with them the secrets of the cosmos, the names of the stars, the purposes of all living things. Knowledge flowed freely in paradise, limited only by their capacity to receive it. Yet even in this perfection, a shadow stirred at the edges of Eden. Envy watched from beyond the garden walls. Resentment burned in hearts that had chosen rebellion over service. The serpent began to coil, preparing for the moment when paradise might be tested. But for now, all was harmony. Adam and Eve lived in perfect unity with each other, with creation, and with their Creator. They were the crown of God's creative work, the bridge between heaven and earth, the first prophets of what humanity could become when it lived in complete harmony with divine purpose. The stage was set for the greatest test of all, not whether they could obey a rule, but whether they could maintain paradise when paradise itself came under attack. The voice in the garden, the fall. The serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field. He approached when Eve was alone near the forbidden tree, choosing his moment with careful calculation. His voice was smooth, cultured, filled with apparent concern and sophisticated reasoning. Has God indeed said, "You shall not eat of every tree of the garden"? The question seemed innocent, almost helpful. Yet it carried within itself the first note of doubt ever introduced to human consciousness. The serpent's words were not a lie, but something more dangerous, a half-truth designed to confuse and mislead. Eve responded honestly, repeating the divine instruction with perfect accuracy. But in her repetition, something subtle changed. Where God had said they would die, she added that they should not even touch the tree. The divine word was being expanded, made more restrictive than it actually was. The serpent seized upon this opening like water flowing through a crack. "You will not surely die," he declared, his voice growing more confident. "For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." The lie was brilliant in its construction. It did not deny that change would come from eating the fruit, but reframed that change as desirable rather than destructive. Death became enlightenment. Disobedience became ascension. Rebellion was painted as the path to divinity itself. Eve looked at the tree with new eyes. The fruit appeared good for food, delightful to the eyes, and desirable to make one wise. Each layer of temptation built upon the last, physical appetite leading to aesthetic appreciation, leading to intellectual pride. The forbidden began to seem not only safe but beneficial. She took of its fruit and ate. The first bite tasted like any other fruit, sweet and satisfying. No immediate punishment fell from heaven. No lightning struck her down. The serpent's words seemed confirmed by experience. Perhaps God had been overprotective after all. Adam found her there, holding the forbidden fruit with juice still on her lips. She offered it to him with enthusiasm, sharing her new discovery. Adam faced a choice unlike any he had known, between obedience to God and loyalty to his wife, between divine command and human relationship. He took the fruit and ate, not because he was deceived like Eve, but because he chose her over God in that moment. His sin was different, yet equally catastrophic. Together, they crossed the boundary that had protected paradise since the beginning. Their eyes were indeed opened, but not to the godlike wisdom they had expected. Instead, they saw their nakedness and felt shame for the first time. Innocence fled like morning mist before the sun. Fear crept into their hearts where trust had always lived. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid themselves among the trees. The intimate fellowship they had enjoyed now seemed dangerous. The friend who had created them became someone to avoid, someone whose presence brought terror rather than joy. "Where are you?" came the divine voice, though the question was not born of ignorance, but of love. God knew exactly where they were and what they had done. The question was an invitation to confession, an opportunity for truth in the midst of deception. But truth had become difficult. Adam blamed both Eve and God himself. "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I ate." Eve blamed the serpent. The harmony of paradise dissolved into accusation and excuse. The first prophecy had been fulfilled. Death had indeed entered the world that day. Not physical death immediately, but something deeper. The death of innocence. The death of perfect fellowship. The death of the world as God intended it to be. Swords of fire, outside Eden. The judgment fell like gentle rain, each word measured and purposeful rather than spoken in anger. To the serpent came the curse of crawling and the promise of ultimate defeat. To Eve came pain in childbearing and tension in marriage. To Adam came toilsome labor and return to dust. Yet, even in judgment, mercy wove itself through every pronouncement. The serpent's defeat was promised through Eve's offspring. Pain would accompany the blessing of children. Work would be difficult, but still productive. Death would come, but not immediately. The Lord God made coats of skins to clothe them, covering their nakedness with his own hands. This first act of divine mercy after the fall showed that love had not been withdrawn, only changed. The intimacy of Eden was lost, but relationship remained possible. "Behold, the man has become like one of us to know good and evil. And now lest he put out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever." The words carried both warning and protection. Eternal life in a fallen state would have been a curse rather than a blessing. Therefore, the Lord God sent them out from the Garden of Eden. The Exodus was not cruel banishment, but necessary mercy. Paradise could not coexist with sin. The perfect environment required perfect hearts, and those hearts no longer existed. Adam and Eve stood at the eastern gate of Eden, looking back at the home they would never see again. Behind them, the garden bloomed in untouched beauty. Before them stretched a world they had never explored, wild and uncertain. The cherubim took their positions at the eastern entrance, mighty beings of power and holiness. The flaming sword turned every way, its fire casting dancing shadows that seemed alive with purpose. No force on earth could pass this barrier. The way back to Eden was sealed forever. Together they walked into their new world, feeling the ground beneath their feet and the weight of their choices upon their shoulders. The earth looked different now, still beautiful, but tinged with sorrow. Thorns and thistles would grow alongside the flowers. Rain would sometimes fail, and seasons would bring both abundance and want. They found shelter in a cave, learning for the first time what it meant to be cold and tired and hungry. Adam worked to provide food and protection while Eve discovered the mysteries of pregnancy. Their bodies functioned as designed, but everything required effort now that had once been effortless. Cain was born in pain and joy mingled together. Eve held him close and declared, "I have acquired a man from the Lord." Even in exile, she recognized divine blessing. Life continued, hope remained possible, and the promises spoken in judgment began to take shape in flesh and blood. Then came Abel, gentler in spirit, drawn to the care of flocks rather than the cultivation of ground. Two sons, two temperaments, two paths that would lead to the first tragedy of the fallen world. The brothers grew in knowledge of both good and evil, learning through experience what their parents had gained through disobedience. They saw beauty and ugliness, kindness and cruelty, love and hatred. The fruit of the forbidden tree ripened in their hearts as it had in their parents' souls. Adam and Eve watched their sons with mingled pride and fear. These children carried within themselves both the image of God and the seeds of rebellion. The future of humanity rested in their choices, and those choices would soon be tested in ways their parents could never have imagined. Paradise was lost, but life continued. The first family had been expelled from Eden, but they had not been abandoned. Divine love followed them into exile, preparing even in judgment for the redemption that would one day come. The first sacrifice, the prophetic divide. Years passed in the world outside Eden. Adam and Eve grew older, learning to live with the consequences of their choice. Their sons matured into men with distinct personalities and purposes. Cain, strong and determined, became a tiller of the ground. Abel, gentle and thoughtful, became a keeper of sheep. The time came when both brothers desired to worship the Creator who had made them. They had grown up hearing stories of Eden, of intimate walks with God in the cool of the day, of the fellowship their parents had lost. Though they had never experienced such closeness themselves, something in their hearts longed to bridge the gap between earth and heaven. Cain brought an offering from the fruit of the ground. His hands had worked the soil, fought against thorns and thistles, struggled with seasons of drought and plenty. The vegetables and grains he offered represented honest labor, the best his fields could produce. In his mind, surely God would appreciate the sweat and effort that went into their cultivation. Abel brought the firstborn of his flock and their fat. The lambs were perfect, without spot or blemish, the finest of all his animals. As he prepared his sacrifice, something stirred in his spirit that went beyond mere duty. He sensed that worship required not just giving something to God, but giving something of value, something costly. Both brothers built their altars with care, arranging stones and gathering wood. Both kindled fires and prepared their offerings with reverent hands. Both looked up to heaven with hope, expecting divine acceptance of their worship. The Lord had respect for Abel and his offering. Fire fell from heaven to consume the sacrifice, flames dancing with supernatural radiance as the fat and flesh were transformed into sweet-smelling smoke. Abel fell on his face in wonder and gratitude, overwhelmed by the divine response to his worship. But for Cain and his offering, there was no such response. His vegetables lay upon the altar unchanged. No heavenly fire touched them. No sign of divine pleasure appeared. The silence stretched out like an accusation, filling Cain's heart with confusion and growing anger. Why had Abel's sacrifice been accepted while his was rejected? Both had worked hard, both had offered sincerely, both had approached God with apparent reverence. Yet only one had received divine favor. The inequity seemed arbitrary, unfair, incomprehensible. Cain's countenance fell, and anger began to burn in his heart like acid. The Lord, who saw all things, spoke to him with gentleness. Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. Its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. The words carried both warning and promise. Divine acceptance was still possible, but a choice had to be made. Sin crouched like a wild beast at the threshold of Cain's heart, ready to pounce if given the slightest opportunity. He could master it through right choices or be mastered by it through wrong ones. But Cain's anger had grown too strong for wisdom to penetrate. He looked at his brother with eyes clouded by resentment and jealousy. Abel had found favor where he had found rejection. Abel had succeeded where he had failed. Abel had become the preferred son while he remained on the outside. The divide that opened between the brothers that day would echo through all of human history. On one side stood those who approached God with humble hearts, offering what he required rather than what they preferred. On the other stood those who insisted on their own terms, their own methods, their own understanding of what worship should be. This was humanity's first theological controversy, its first religious division. Blood had not yet been shed, but the foundations were being laid for the tragedy that would soon follow. Two brothers, two approaches to God, two destinies that would shape the course of human civilization. Marked by God, Cain's curse. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother and took his life. The first drops of human blood soaked into the earth, marking forever the transition from innocence to violence. Paradise had known no death, but the world outside Eden would be stained with it from this moment forward. The deed was done in secret, with no human witness present. Cain looked down at his brother's still form and felt no satisfaction, only a growing horror at what his anger had driven him to do. The jealousy that had burned so fiercely now left behind only ashes and regret. But there had been a witness. The Lord God, who sees all things, called to Cain just as he had called to Adam in the garden. Where is Abel your brother? The question was not born of ignorance, but of love, offering Cain the opportunity to confess and find mercy even in his terrible guilt. Instead, Cain chose defiance. I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? The words carried both falsehood and arrogance, denying responsibility for the very relationship God had given him to protect and cherish. In killing Abel, he had not just taken a life, but broken the fundamental bond that tied humanity together. What have you done? Came the divine response, heavy with sorrow. The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Abel's shed blood had found a voice that reached to heaven itself, demanding justice for the innocent life so violently taken. The ground that had received Abel's blood would no longer yield its strength to Cain. The very earth would resist his efforts, turning his labor into frustration. He would become a fugitive and a vagabond, wandering the earth without rest or permanent home. Cain's heart filled with terror as the weight of his punishment became clear. My punishment is greater than I can bear, he cried out in anguish. You have driven me out this day from the face of the ground, and I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, and it will happen that anyone who finds me will slay me. Even in his rebellion, Cain recognized the horror of being cut off from divine presence. To be hidden from God's face was worse than any physical suffering, worse than wandering or hunger or homelessness. The spiritual death was more terrible than the natural consequences, but mercy followed even this most severe judgment. Not so, the Lord declared. Therefore, whoever slays Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. A mark was set upon Cain, a sign that would protect him from the violence he had introduced to the world. What was this mark? Some visible sign that identified him as under divine protection despite his terrible crime. Though he had forfeited the right to safety through his violence against Abel, God's grace ensured that the cycle of vengeance would not spiral out of control through his death. Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, east of Eden. There he built the first city, surrounding himself with walls and defenses, seeking in human community the security he could no longer find in divine fellowship. He took a wife, and she bore him Enoch, for whom the city was named. Life continued even in exile. Families formed even under divine judgment. Cain's descendants would become pioneers in technology and culture, developing skills in metalwork, music, and urban planning. Yet the mark remained, and the guilt remained, and the separation from divine presence remained. Cain had introduced violence to the world and could never undo that terrible innovation. His legacy would be both great achievements and great sorrow, both cities built and innocence destroyed. The first prophecy given in Eden had been fulfilled. Death had indeed entered the world through human choice, but it had come not through the forbidden fruit directly, but through the sinful heart that fruit had corrupted. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil had borne its bitter harvest in the first drops of innocent blood. Enoch the elder, Cain's descendants. The city of Enoch grew beyond its founder's dreams. Streets spread out from the central square, houses rose with careful craftsmanship, and markets bustled with the trade of goods and ideas. Cain's descendants proved themselves remarkably gifted, their minds sharp and their hands skilled in ways that transformed the world around them. Enoch, the son of Cain, became the city's first ruler, organizing its growth and establishing laws to govern its people. Though his father had introduced violence to the world, young Enoch sought to create order from chaos, building civilization as a barrier against the wildness that lurked beyond the city walls. Generations passed, and each brought new innovations. Irad followed Enoch, then Mehujael, then Methusael. The family line remained strong, producing leaders and inventors who pushed the boundaries of human achievement. Yet, with each generation, the memory of their ancestors' crimes seemed to fade while the mark of his protection remained. Then came Lamech, great-great-great-grandson of Cain, whose life would echo his ancestors' violence while surpassing it in arrogance. Lamech took two wives, Ada and Zillah, becoming the first man recorded to practice polygamy. What God had designed as the union of one man and one woman, Lamech expanded to suit his own desires. From Ada came Jabal, who became the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. He developed the nomadic lifestyle, perfecting the art of moving with herds across great distances, finding fresh pasture and clean water. His innovation allowed humanity to spread across lands that could not support permanent settlements. Jabal's brother Jubal became the father of all those who play the harp and flute. Music had existed since the creation of humanity. Adam and Eve surely sang in Eden, but Jubal developed it into art. He carved the first instruments, composed the first melodies, taught others to find joy and expression in organized sound. From Lamech's second wife, Zillah, came Tubal-Cain, the instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. He was the first metalworker, discovering how to extract ore from the earth, how to build furnaces hot enough to melt metal, how to shape tools and weapons from the molten material. These innovations transformed human life dramatically. Better tools made agriculture more productive. Musical instruments enriched cultural life. Metalworking provided both farming implements and weapons of war. The children of Cain pushed human civilization forward at an unprecedented pace. Yet progress came with a price. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah, whose beauty became legendary but whose heart grew cold with pride. The technological advances that should have improved human life also made possible greater cruelty and more efficient violence. Lamech himself embodied this dark side of progress. He composed what may have been the first song recorded in Scripture, but its lyrics celebrated violence rather than beauty. Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have slain a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. The song revealed how far Cain's line had traveled from the protective mark their ancestor had received. Where Cain had feared for his life after taking Abel's, Lamech boasted of his ability to take others' lives for even minor offenses. Violence had not only returned to the world, but had been refined and celebrated. The descendants of Cain became the world's first urban civilization, complete with arts, technology, and culture. They built cities, composed music, worked metal, and organized complex societies. Yet their achievements were shadowed by the pride and violence that had marked their line from the beginning. Their innovations would bless humanity for generations to come. Their attitudes would curse it. In the line of Cain, human potential reached new heights, while human character sank to new depths. Progress and regression walked hand in hand toward a future that would test whether civilization could survive its own success. The birth of Seth, a righteous line. After the death of Abel and the exile of Cain, Adam and Eve found themselves facing a future they had not imagined. Their family was broken, one son a wanderer bearing the mark of divine judgment, the other lying silent in the earth. The promise of offspring who would one day triumph over evil seemed more distant than ever. Yet in their darkest hour, hope stirred again. Eve conceived and bore another son, and she called his name Seth, saying, "God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain slew." In this naming was both grief and faith. Grief for the son who was gone, faith that God's promises would not fail despite human failure. Seth grew up knowing the story of his brothers. He learned of Abel's accepted sacrifice and righteous heart, of Cain's jealousy and terrible crime. But rather than filling him with fear or anger, these stories shaped his character toward gentleness and wisdom. He became the bridge between his parents' generation and the future of humanity. Where Cain had built a city and gathered people around himself, Seth chose a different path. He lived simply, worked honestly, and sought the face of God with sincere devotion. His heart turned toward heaven rather than earthly achievement, toward relationship rather than recognition. When Seth was 105 years old, he became the father of Enosh. The name meant mortal or frail, reflecting perhaps a growing awareness of human weakness and need for divine help. Unlike Cain's line, which celebrated human strength and achievement, Seth's descendants would remember their dependence upon their Creator. During the days of Enosh, something remarkable happened. Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. This was humanity's first recorded revival, a turning back to God after generations of increasing godlessness. The initiative came not from divine command, but from human hearts, recognizing their need for something greater than themselves. What did it mean to call upon the name of the Lord? It meant public worship, community prayer, organized recognition of divine authority. Where Cain's descendants had celebrated human achievement, Seth's descendants celebrated divine grace. Where Cain's line had grown increasingly violent, Seth's line sought peace. The contrast between the two lines of humanity became more pronounced with each generation. Cain's descendants excelled in technology and culture, but grew in pride and violence. Seth's descendants lived simply, but grew in wisdom and godliness. Two different approaches to human existence were developing, two different destinies being shaped. Seth lived 912 years and had many sons and daughters. His long life allowed him to see multiple generations of his descendants, to guide and teach them, to ensure that the knowledge of God was passed down faithfully. He became the patriarch of the righteous line, the keeper of divine truth in a world growing increasingly dark. Through Seth would come Noah, who would preserve humanity through the flood. Through Seth would eventually come Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Through Seth would come the line that would produce the promised seed, the one who would finally crush the serpent's head and restore what had been lost in Eden. But Seth himself could not see all of this future glory. He simply lived faithfully day by day, raising his children to know and serve their Creator. He planted seeds of righteousness that would bear fruit for thousands of years, though the harvest lay far beyond his sight. In the genealogy that would follow, Seth's name would stand as a beacon of hope, the son who replaced the murdered Abel, the father who restored the worship of God, the ancestor through whom divine promises would ultimately be fulfilled. His birth marked not just the continuation of human life, but the preservation of human hope. The days of Adam, prophecies in the dust. The first man lived 930 years. Each sunrise brought memory. Each sunset carried wisdom deeper into his bones. Adam walked the earth when it still remembered Eden's perfection. His footsteps traced paths between what was and what would be. In those long centuries, Adam became more than father. He transformed into keeper of the first story. Children gathered at his knees to hear about the garden. Grandchildren listened to tales of walking with the Creator in the cool of the day. Great-grandchildren learned of the tree, the choice, the exile that shaped their world. The first prophecy lived in Adam's voice. "You will surely perish," God had warned. Now Adam watched that truth unfold across generations. Bodies grew old, breath ceased, earth reclaimed dust. The pattern began with him and would continue through his descendants. Adam's words carried weight beyond human understanding. When he spoke of the garden, listeners felt homesickness for a place they'd never seen. When he described God's voice, their hearts stirred with longing they couldn't name. The first man bore witness to humanity's beginning. His testimony became foundation for all who would follow. Years accumulated like fallen leaves. Adam saw Cain's children build cities, while Seth's offspring called upon the name of the Lord. Two paths diverged from his loins. One pursued earthly glory, the other sought divine connection. Both streams flowed from his choice in the garden. The aged patriarch understood consequences in ways his descendants could not. Every act of violence echoed his first disobedience. Every moment of worship reflected the relationship he'd lost. Adam lived between paradise remembered and judgment deserved. His very existence proclaimed both God's mercy and justice. Stories multiplied as Adam's life stretched on. Some tales spoke of his continued conversations with angels. Others described visits from the Creator himself. Ancient texts whispered of Adam receiving visions of the future. His sons and daughters treasured these accounts, passing them down like precious heirlooms. The first man became prophet through experience rather than calling. His warnings came from lived truth, not divine revelation alone. "Choose wisely," he would tell the young ones. "Every decision carries the weight of eternity." His counsel shaped hearts across centuries. In his final years, Adam's body bent with age, but his spirit remained sharp. The weight of humanity's origin rested on his shoulders. He'd watched the world change from perfect to fallen. He'd seen innocence give way to knowledge. He'd witnessed the birth of both righteousness and wickedness among his children. When death finally approached, Adam faced it without fear. He'd known this ending would come since the day he touched forbidden fruit. The first prophecy would be fulfilled in his own flesh. He gathered his family close and spoke final words that would echo through generations. The keeper of the beginning had reached his end. Enoch the righteous. Seventh from Adam, 7 generations from Adam walked a man unlike the others. Enoch moved through the world, but seemed to exist partly beyond it. His steps carried purpose that transcended earthly concerns. His eyes held depths that suggested vision beyond the physical realm. The line of Seth had produced godly men, but Enoch stood apart even among the righteous. He walked with God in ways that puzzled his contemporaries. While others prayed, Enoch conversed. While others worshipped, Enoch communed. The boundary between heaven and earth grew thin in his presence. From childhood, Enoch displayed unusual sensitivity to spiritual matters. He heard whispers others missed. He saw movements in the unseen realm. His parents recognized something special in their son, but couldn't name it. The boy who would become prophet showed signs early. As Enoch matured, his relationship with the Creator deepened. Daily walks became divine encounters. Simple prayers transformed into lengthy dialogues. The young man discovered that heaven was more accessible than most believed. God sought fellowship with those who genuinely pursued him. The name Enoch meant dedicated or trained. He lived up to his designation completely. Every day brought new lessons in righteousness. Every encounter with the divine expanded his understanding. The seventh from Adam became first in spiritual insight among his generation. Enoch's contemporaries watched with wonder and unease. Here walked a man who claimed regular conversation with the Almighty. His prophecies proved accurate. His wisdom surpassed human learning. Yet he remained humble, approachable, fully engaged with family and community life. The righteous man took a wife and fathered children. His son Methuselah would live longer than any human before or since. Perhaps the blessing flowed from his father's exceptional relationship with heaven. Enoch balanced earthly responsibilities with heavenly calling. Years passed, and Enoch's reputation spread. People traveled great distances to hear his words. He spoke of coming judgment with authority that commanded attention. His messages carried weight because his life backed them up. This prophet walked his talk in ways that impressed even skeptics. The ancient world knew many wise men, but Enoch stood unique. Philosophers offered theories about existence. Enoch provided eyewitness accounts of heaven's reality. Others speculated about divine nature. Enoch shared insights from personal encounters with the Creator. As his prophetic ministry developed, Enoch received increasingly dramatic revelations. Visions of the future unfolded before his spiritual eyes. Angels became frequent companions. The cosmos revealed secrets hidden from ordinary mortals. The seventh from Adam gained access to extraordinary divine mysteries. The Book of Enoch, Visions of the Watchers. Heaven opened before Enoch like a scroll unrolling. Divine mysteries that remained hidden from other mortals spilled into his consciousness. The righteous man found himself witness to cosmic rebellion that would reshape the world. His visions began with wonder and progressed to horror. The first revelation concerned the Watchers. These were angels assigned to observe humanity from their celestial posts. Pure beings of light and power, they held positions of great authority in the heavenly hierarchy. Their duty was simple: watch over the descendants of Adam without interference. But watching became wanting. Enoch saw in vision how the Watchers grew restless in their roles. The daughters of men caught their attention. Beauty and desire awakened in beings designed for higher purposes. The angelic host began to question their restrictions. 200 Watchers descended to Mount Hermon. They swore binding oaths to each other, knowing their action violated divine order. Led by Semjaza and Azazel, they abandoned their heavenly stations. The consequences of their choice would echo through generations. These fallen angels took human women as wives. The unions produced offspring unlike anything seen before. Giants walked the earth, beings of immense size and terrible power. The Nephilim, as they came to be known, inherited both human ambition and angelic might. Their presence corrupted creation itself. Enoch watched in vision as the Watchers taught forbidden knowledge to humanity. Azazel revealed weapon-making secrets. Others shared cosmetics, jewelry craft, and enchantments. Barakel taught astrology. Kokabel shared the knowledge of the stars. Each lesson drew mankind further from innocence. The corruption spread like poison through water. Violence increased as humans learned new ways to harm each other. Vanity flourished with knowledge of adornment. In fact, the earth filled with bloodshed as weapons multiplied. What began as angelic rebellion became human degradation. Enoch's visions revealed heaven's response to the crisis. The righteous angels petitioned the Most High, reporting the Watchers' sins. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel presented evidence of the growing corruption. Divine justice prepared to intervene. The prophets saw the judgment pronounced upon the Watchers. They would be bound in darkness until the day of final reckoning. Their giant offspring would turn upon each other, clearing the earth through mutual destruction. The knowledge they taught would become curse rather than blessing. In his visions, Enoch witnessed the earth crying out from the blood spilled upon it. The ground itself groaned under the weight of violence. Creation longed for cleansing, for restoration of the order the Watchers had disrupted. Heaven heard these cries and prepared response. The Book of Enoch, as his visions came to be called, revealed the cosmic background to earthly events. Behind human history played out a drama of angelic rebellion and divine justice. The prophets saw how spiritual choices in the heavenly realm directly affected life on earth below. Judgment from the sky, Enoch's prophecy. The voice of the Almighty thundered through Enoch's vision with terrifying clarity. Judgment was coming. The earth, soaked in corruption from the Watchers' rebellion, would face divine cleansing. The prophet saw waters rising, covering mountains, silencing the cries of the wicked. Enoch trembled as the future unfolded before his spiritual eyes. The flood would be complete, overwhelming. Every living thing that breathed air would perish beneath the waters. Only one family would survive, preserved in a vessel of divine design. The world would begin again from almost nothing. The timing of the judgment remained hidden, but the certainty was absolute. God's patience had limits. The violence and corruption that flowed from the Watchers' teaching would not continue indefinitely. Divine justice required response to such widespread rebellion against heaven's order. In his prophecy, Enoch saw beyond the flood to an even greater judgment day. Fire would consume the earth in the end times. The righteous would inherit a new heaven and new earth. The wicked would face eternal separation from their Creator. The cosmos itself would be made new. The watchers, bound in darkness, would face final judgment. Their leader Azazel would be cast into the desert, covered with rough stones. The other fallen angels would watch as their giant offspring turned upon each other. Their punishment would serve as warning to all created beings. Enoch's prophecy described the day of the Lord in vivid detail. The righteous would shine like stars in the kingdom of heaven. The elect would walk in paths of peace. God himself would dwell among his people. Evil would be remembered no more. The prophet's words spread among the righteous descendants of Seth. They treasured his visions, copying them carefully for future generations. The coming judgment gave urgency to their worship, depth to their prayers. They understood that time was limited. Some among the wicked heard Enoch's warnings and mocked. How could water cover the entire earth? Where would such massive amounts come from? The very idea seemed impossible to minds focused only on the physical realm. Their skepticism would prove fatal. The righteous, however, took Enoch's prophecies seriously. They prepared their hearts for what was coming. Some began to live more deliberately, seeking God with greater intensity. Others focused on passing divine knowledge to their children, knowing the coming judgment would reset human civilization. Enoch's prophecy carried specific details about the flood's duration and scope. 40 days of rain would combine with underground waters breaking forth. The deluge would last over a year. Only those preserved by divine command would survive to repopulate the earth. The prophets saw how the flood would serve both judgment and mercy. Justice required punishment for the corruption that had spread across creation. Mercy provided a way of escape for those who walked with God. The same waters that brought destruction would also bring cleansing. The secrets of heaven, astronomy, time, and law. Enoch's spiritual journeys carried him beyond earthly realms into the very courts of heaven. There, mysteries hidden from mortal understanding unveiled themselves. The righteous prophet learned cosmic secrets that would reshape human knowledge of creation's order and divine purpose. The angels revealed to Enoch the movements of celestial bodies. He learned that the sun, moon, and stars followed precise patterns established by divine decree. Nothing in the heavens moved by chance. Each celestial object maintained its course according to laws set by the Creator's will. The calendar system used by humanity was flawed, Enoch discovered. The true year contained 364 days, perfectly divisible into weeks and seasons. The solar year aligned with divine purpose in ways that human calculations missed. This knowledge would prove crucial for understanding prophetic timing. Heaven's structure amazed the visiting prophet. 7 heavens stretched above the earth, each with distinct purposes and inhabitants. The righteous dwelt in chambers of light. Angels maintained their stations according to their orders. At the highest level, the throne of the Almighty blazed with indescribable glory. Enoch learned about the portals of heaven through which winds blew upon the earth. 12 gates opened to release different types of weather. From some came gentle breezes, others unleashed storms. The prophet understood that even weather patterns followed divine command rather than natural randomness. The movements of the sun received particular attention in Enoch's education. The great light traveled through portals that changed with the seasons. Its path determined day length, temperature, and agricultural cycles. Everything on earth responded to the sun's divinely ordered journey across the sky. Lunar cycles followed equally precise patterns. The moon waxed and waned according to schedule established before humanity's creation. Its light served as timekeeper for those who understood heaven's calendar. The prophet memorized these cycles for the benefit of future generations. The stars themselves carried messages and purposes beyond human imagination. Each constellation served specific functions in the cosmic order. Some marked seasons. Others announced divine events. The careful observer could read heaven's communications written in starlight across the night sky. Angelic hierarchies maintained order throughout creation. Enoch learned their names, ranks, and responsibilities. Some angels controlled weather patterns. Others governed the movements of celestial bodies. Each had roles that supported the overall harmony of existence. The prophet discovered that time itself was measured differently in heaven than on earth. Divine perspective viewed past, present, and future simultaneously. What seemed like ages to humans were moments to the eternal Creator. This knowledge helped Enoch understand prophetic visions that spanned centuries. Laws governing spiritual realms proved as precise as those controlling physical creation. Justice, mercy, holiness, and love operated according to divine principles that never varied. The prophet learned that God's character formed the foundation upon which all existence rested. Enoch's ascent, taken alive. The day arrived when Enoch would no longer walk among men. 300 years of communion with the Creator had prepared him for a transition unlike any other human would experience. Instead of tasting the consequence that befell all Adam's children, the righteous prophet would bypass the grave entirely. Enoch sensed the approaching change in the quality of his divine encounters. The conversations with angels grew more frequent and intense. Visions arrived with greater clarity and depth. The boundary between earth and heaven thinned until it nearly disappeared. The prophet existed increasingly in both realms simultaneously. His family noticed the transformation first. Enoch seemed to glow with inner light during his final days among them. His words carried unusual authority and urgency. He spoke often of seeing the face of God, of standing before the throne of glory. His loved ones treasured every conversation, sensing their time together was ending. The actual moment of translation came quietly. Enoch was walking with God as he did each day. But this time, the journey continued beyond earthly boundaries. Step by step, the prophet moved from the physical realm into the spiritual. His body underwent transformation, becoming suitable for heavenly existence. No witnesses observed the exact moment of Enoch's departure. One day, he was present among his people. The next day brought searching, calling, wondering. He is not, for God took him. This simple statement would echo through ages, marking the first human to escape the consequences of Adam's choice. The righteous descendants of Seth mourned their loss while celebrating Enoch's remarkable destiny. Here was proof that communion with God could overcome even the ultimate consequence of sin. The prophet's translation offered hope to all who sought divine relationship. Perhaps others might also find favor sufficient to transcend ordinary human limitations. Enoch's departure left a void that would never be completely filled. His prophetic voice, his wisdom, his intimate knowledge of heaven's secrets, all were gone from earth. Future generations would cherish his written revelations, but long for his personal guidance through the increasing darkness of their age. The taken prophet's influence continued growing even in his absence. His prophecies gained credibility from his extraordinary translation. Who could doubt words spoken by a man God valued enough to preserve from the grave? Enoch's warnings about coming judgment carried weight that increased over time. In heaven, Enoch discovered his earthly ministry had been preparation for greater service. The angel Metatron, some traditions claim, was the translated prophet transformed for celestial purposes. Whether true or symbolic, the concept suggests that those faithful on earth find expanded roles in heavenly realms. The memory of Enoch's walk with God inspired the righteous while troubling the wicked. His example proved that intimate relationship with the Creator remained possible despite humanity's fallen condition. The descendants of Seth took encouragement from their ancestors' achievement, seeking their own deeper communion with the Almighty. Stories of Enoch's translation spread beyond the godly line. Even among Cain's descendants, some wondered about this man who had transcended normal human experience. His departure served as witness to divine power and mercy. The testimony of the taken prophet reached hearts across the ancient world. Methuselah and Lamech, the carriers of Enoch's word. After Enoch's translation to heaven, his prophetic mantle fell upon those closest to him. His son Methuselah carried forward the sacred duty of preserving and proclaiming divine revelations. The responsibility weighed heavy on shoulders that would bear it longer than any human in history. Methuselah lived 969 years, a lifespan that became legendary. Each day brought opportunity to share his father's visions with new listeners. Children who heard Enoch's prophecies from the son's lips would age and pass them to their own descendants. The prophetic word spread through time like ripples across still water. The name Methuselah meant, "When he dies, it shall come." Some understood this as prophetic reference to the flood judgment Enoch had foreseen. The long-lived man served as living countdown to divine judgment. His continued existence meant the world had more time for repentance and preparation. As decades became centuries, Methuselah watched the corruption Enoch had prophesied increase across the earth. The Nephilim giants grew in number and violence. Human civilization advanced in knowledge and technology while declining in righteousness. The patient carrier of his father's word witnessed prophecy fulfilling itself in real time. Methuselah's son Lamech inherited both longevity and prophetic sensitivity. When his son Noah was born, Lamech experienced visions that troubled his spirit. The child seemed different from other newborns. Light appeared to shine from his skin. His eyes held unusual depth and intelligence. Something was stirring in the spiritual realm. The birth brought Lamech strange dreams and waking visions. He saw waters covering the earth, vast beyond imagination. He witnessed his infant son building something enormous, unlike any construction then known. Animals gathered in impossible numbers, drawn by power beyond human understanding. The prophecies of Enoch were approaching fulfillment. Uncertain about these revelations, Lamech traveled to consult his father Methuselah. The aged keeper of Enoch's word listened carefully to his son's account. Recognition dawned in eyes that had seen nearly 9 centuries pass. The time of judgment was approaching. This child would play a crucial role in coming events. Methuselah confirmed Lamech's visions by sharing additional details from Enoch's prophecies. The flood would indeed come. One family would be preserved to continue the human race. The child Noah carried destiny in his very name, which meant rest or comfort. Through him, the earth would find relief from its corruption. The two men established a plan for preparing Noah for his future calling. From earliest childhood, he would learn about righteousness, about walking with God as Enoch had done. The prophetic heritage would pass to this special child who would face humanity's greatest crisis. Years flowed past like water seeking its level. Methuselah continued his ministry of preservation and proclamation. Lamech raised his son with careful attention to spiritual formation. The prophetic word lived on through their faithful stewardship, waiting for the moment when it would prove devastatingly accurate. The carriers of Enoch's word understood their role in the cosmic drama unfolding around them. They were bridges between the translated prophet and the coming deliverer. Their faithfulness ensured that divine revelation would survive to guide the one who would guide humanity through judgment to new beginning. The sons of God, the age of giants. The earth groaned beneath the weight of unnatural offspring. Where angels had once maintained their heavenly posts, chaos now reigned. The Watchers' rebellion had produced consequences that corrupted creation itself. Giants walked among men, beings whose very existence defied divine order. These Nephilim, born from the union of spiritual beings with human women, possessed characteristics that belonged to neither realm fully. Their size dwarfed normal humans. Their strength broke boundaries of natural law. Their appetites exceeded what Earth's resources could satisfy. They lived as storms given flesh, disrupting everything they touched. The giants' minds worked differently than human consciousness. Angelic knowledge mixed with human ambition created thoughts both brilliant and terrible. They understood secrets of creation that mortals barely glimpsed. Yet they used this wisdom for purposes that violated the harmony heaven intended for Earth. Cities trembled when the Nephilim approached. Their demands stripped communities of food, goods, and people. What they could not take by intimidation, they seized through violence. The descendants of Adam learned to fear these children of forbidden unions. Humanity became prey to its own corrupted relatives. The giants quarreled among themselves with destructive fury. When beings of such power fought, the earth itself suffered. Mountains cracked, rivers changed course. The very ground bore scars from their conflicts. Creation longed for relief from the violence that flowed from the Watcher's choice. Some Nephilim established kingdoms ruled by fear and force. They built monuments to their own power, structures that defied both engineering logic and divine purpose. These works became symbols of rebellion against heaven's authority. The giants sought to prove their superiority over both angels and humans. Knowledge flowed from the fallen angels to their offspring and then to human civilization. Metallurgy advanced rapidly as weapons became deadlier. Architecture grew more ambitious and prideful. Arts flourished but carried spiritual corruption within their beauty. Progress came at the cost of innocence and righteousness. The line between human and giant blurred as intermarriage continued. Some descendants retained normal size but carried the violence and corruption of their Nephilim heritage. Others grew to unusual height while maintaining human appearance. The genetic legacy of the Watchers' rebellion spread through bloodlines across the ancient world. Warfare escalated as different groups of giants competed for territory and resources. Human populations became pawns in conflicts between beings whose power they could not match. Entire peoples faced extinction when caught between warring factions of these mighty ones. The earth filled with the sound of battle and the smell of blood. Religious corruption followed physical degradation. The giants demanded worship from humans, setting themselves up as gods. Temples rose to honor these false deities. Sacrifices flowed, often including human victims. The knowledge of the true Creator grew dim as humanity bowed before the offspring of rebellion. In the midst of this chaos, the faithful descendants of Seth maintained their worship of the Most High. They preserved the teachings of Enoch and the prophecies that promised eventual judgment. Their small communities served as lighthouses in the growing darkness, keeping alive the hope of divine intervention. Noah is born, a child like no other. When Lamech's wife went into labor, signs appeared that marked this birth as extraordinary. Light seemed to gather in the birthing chamber. The midwives whispered of unusual warmth that filled the room. When the child finally emerged, he glowed with radiance that startled all present. This was no ordinary addition to Seth's lineage. The infant's skin carried luminescence that defied explanation. His eyes, when they opened, held depths that suggested wisdom beyond his moments of existence. The baby's cries seemed to carry melodies that soothed rather than disturbed. Everything about this newborn spoke of divine purpose and special calling. Lamech gazed upon his son with mixture of wonder and concern. The visions he'd experienced during his wife's pregnancy returned with vivid clarity. This child would face trials beyond imagination. He would stand between humanity and extinction. The weight of the world's future rested on tiny shoulders that had just drawn their first breath. The name came to Lamech as he held his glowing son. Noah, meaning rest or comfort, seemed perfectly suited for one who would bring relief from the violence and corruption plaguing the earth. Through this child, the prophecies suggested humanity would find respite from the chaos unleashed by the Watchers' rebellion. As days passed, the child's unusual nature became more apparent. Noah rarely cried and seemed to respond to sounds others couldn't hear. His development progressed faster than normal infants. When he looked at people, they felt as though he saw into their hearts. The family recognized they were raising someone marked by heaven itself. Neighbors came to witness the remarkable child. Some left convinced they'd seen divine intervention. Others departed troubled by mysteries they couldn't understand. Stories spread throughout the community about Lamech's son who glowed like starlight and seemed to commune with unseen beings. The infant's presence brought peace to troubled households. When he was nearby, arguments ceased and harmony prevailed. Animals seemed drawn to him, approaching without fear. Even the weather appeared to respond to his presence, with gentle rains falling when the fields needed water. Nature itself seemed to recognize the special child. Methuselah, now ancient even by the standards of that age, made the journey to see his great-grandson. When the patriarch held Noah, tears streamed down his weathered face. In this child, he saw the fulfillment of prophecies his father Enoch had received centuries earlier. The promised deliverer had arrived. Dark forces seemed to sense the threat this child represented. Storms gathered without warning when Noah was taken outside. Wild animals that had grown aggressive under the giant's influence kept their distance from him. Even the Nephilim appeared to avoid areas where the glowing child lived. Heaven's protection surrounded the promised one. As Noah grew from infant to toddler, his family began his education in righteousness. They shared stories of Enoch's walk with God, of Adam's testimony about the garden, of the coming judgment that would cleanse the earth, the child listened with attention that surpassed his years, absorbing lessons that would guide him through humanity's darkest hour. The birth of Noah marked a turning point in the cosmic struggle between good and evil. Here was heaven's answer to the corruption spreading across creation. This child would grow to become the bridge between the world that was and the world that would be. In his small hands lay the future of all living things. Noah's youth, the final prophet. Before the flood. The boy who glowed with inner light grew into a young man whose righteousness shone even brighter. Noah's character developed along lines that pleased his creator and troubled the corrupt world around him. While his generation pursued violence and pleasure, he walked the narrow path of communion with God. From earliest childhood, Noah heard the voice of the Almighty with unusual clarity. Divine conversations that others achieved only through intense prayer came naturally to him. He understood himself to be set apart for purposes that remained partially hidden but clearly significant. The young prophet accepted his calling with humility and determination. Noah's education combined practical skills with spiritual formation. His father Lamech and great-grandfather Methuselah taught him craftsmanship, agriculture, and animal husbandry. These earthly abilities would prove essential for the massive task awaiting him. Yet they also grounded his spiritual insights in real-world experience. The growing corruption around him became Noah's greatest teacher. He witnessed the violence of the Nephilim, the despair of oppressed humans, the degradation of creation itself. These observations drove him deeper into relationship with his Creator. Through prayer and fasting, Noah sought divine perspective on the chaos surrounding him. As Noah matured into adulthood, his prophetic ministry began in earnest. Divine revelations came with increasing frequency and intensity. He saw visions of water covering the mountains. He heard the cries of the earth demanding justice. He understood that judgment was not merely coming, it was necessary for creation's survival. The young prophet's first public proclamations met with skepticism and mockery. Who was this glowing oddity to speak of divine judgment? The world had endured corruption for generations. If God intended intervention, why had it not already occurred? Noah's warnings seemed fantastic to minds focused on immediate pleasures and concerns. But Noah persisted in his calling despite the ridicule. He preached in marketplaces and gathering areas, warning of coming floodwaters. His messages emphasized both justice and mercy. Judgment was certain, but repentance remained possible. The Creator still sought hearts willing to turn from wickedness toward righteousness. Years passed as Noah matured from youth into middle age. His prophetic voice grew stronger and more urgent. The corruption he witnessed deepened, fulfilling Enoch's ancient predictions about the last days before judgment. Violence increased, righteousness declined. The earth itself seemed to cry out for relief. Noah's personal life provided foundation for his public ministry. He married a woman who shared his faith and commitment to righteousness. Together, they established a household that served as beacon of godliness in an increasingly dark world. Their example challenged others to consider different ways of living. The prophet's reputation spread beyond his immediate community. Some traveled great distances to hear the man who claimed direct communication with the Creator. His words carried authority that convinced some listeners while hardening others in their rebellion. Noah became catalyst for decisions that would determine eternal destinies. As the corruption reached levels that matched Enoch's darkest visions, Noah's message intensified. Time was running short. The patience of heaven had limits. Soon, divine justice would sweep across the earth like floodwaters. Those who persisted in wickedness would face consequences they could not imagine. The final prophet before the flood had delivered his warning. Divine grief. God regrets creation high above the earth, beyond the stars and the endless sky. The Creator looks down. What he sees breaks his heart in ways that shake the very foundations of heaven. The world he spoke into being with such care now writhes in darkness. Every thought of man's heart has turned to evil. Violence flows like rivers through every valley. The strong crush the weak without mercy. Children learn cruelty before they learn their names. The Nephilim giants stride across continents like walking disasters. Their massive footsteps leave craters where cities once stood. They hunt humans for sport, treating God's beloved creation like wild beasts. Their hybrid nature carries a corruption so deep it poisons the very ground they walk upon. The earth itself cries out in pain. But the giants are not the only source of sorrow. Regular humans have learned to match their cruelty. Cain's descendants have spread their philosophy of vengeance across nations. Lamech's 77-fold revenge has become a twisted law that governs every interaction. Wars rage without purpose. Families destroy each other over scraps of land. Love has become a forgotten word. The Watcher's forbidden knowledge has twisted human minds beyond recognition. Men practice dark arts that should never have been revealed. They speak with demons as easily as they once spoke with their neighbors. Sacred boundaries dissolve as humans attempt to become gods themselves. The natural order crumbles under the weight of their rebellion. In the quiet moments between the screams, the Creator remembers the garden. He recalls Adam walking in the cool of the evening, eager for their conversations. He remembers Eve's wonder at her first sunrise, her joy at the birth of her children. The memory of Abel's pure sacrifice still brings warmth to his heart. These were his children once, made in his own image. Noah stands alone in his generation, a single candle flickering in an endless storm. His family huddles around the light he provides, but even they sometimes struggle to believe. The world mocks Noah's preaching with increasing boldness. Children throw stones at him as he walks to the marketplace. Adults turn their backs when he approaches. His own extended family has stopped inviting him to gatherings. The corruption runs deeper than flesh. The very thoughts of humanity have become an endless stream of violence and selfishness. Where once people dreamed of beauty and creation, now they plot destruction and theft. Where once they sought to honor their Creator, now they worship the creatures of their own hands. Gold has become their god. Power has become their prayer. Animals flee from human settlements in terror. The beasts that once lived in harmony with mankind now hide in the deepest forests and highest mountains. Even the birds change their migration patterns to avoid the cities of men. Creation itself recognizes the poison that humanity has become. Yet the hardest truth cuts deepest of all. This is not the work of outsiders or invaders. These are the children of Adam and Eve, the descendants of those who walked with God in paradise. The potential for such beauty lived in every human heart. The capacity for such love flowed in every human soul. But choice after choice, generation after generation, they have selected the path that leads away from light. The Creator's grief shakes the heavenly places. Angels weep at the sight of their master's sorrow. The morning stars, which once sang together at creation's dawn, now dim with sadness. The very foundations of eternity tremble under the weight of divine regret. In his perfect justice, God sees every crime. In his perfect love, he feels every victim's pain as if it were his own. The cries of the innocent rise like incense before his throne. The blood of the righteous soaks into the ground and calls out for justice. How long can perfect holiness endure such corruption? How long can infinite love tolerate such hatred? The decision forms slowly like storm clouds gathering on the horizon, not in anger, but in the terrible clarity that comes when all other options have been exhausted. The experiment of free will has revealed its darkest possibilities. Humanity has chosen its path with eyes wide open. They have heard the warnings of Enoch and Noah. They have seen the signs and wonders. They have felt the gentle pull of their Creator's love. But they have answered with violence. They have responded with rebellion. They have met divine patience with human arrogance. The time for warnings draws to a close. The season of mercy approaches its end. Soon, very soon, the rains will begin to fall. Instructions from heaven. Build the ark. The voice comes to Noah in the stillness before dawn, not in earthquake or fire, but in the gentle whisper that he has learned to recognize over many years of walking with God. This morning, however, the message carries a weight that makes his knees buckle. The Creator speaks of ending, of washing clean, of starting again. Noah listens in silence as divine instructions unfold like blueprints in his mind. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. 3 decks, rooms throughout, a window, a door in the side. Gopher wood covered with pitch inside and out. Every detail arrives with crystal clarity as if the ark already exists in some heavenly dimension and needs only to be built on earth. The specifications seem impossible at first. The finished vessel will dwarf any structure ever attempted by human hands. It will require more lumber than entire forests contain. The labor will take years, perhaps decades. Noah calculates the resources needed and feels overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task ahead. But divine wisdom comes with divine provision. God reveals the location of suitable trees, hidden groves where gopher wood grows in abundance. He shows Noah springs of pure water for the construction process and deposits of natural pitch that will seal every joint. What seems impossible to human eyes becomes merely difficult when viewed through the lens of faith. The ark's design serves purposes beyond simple survival. Its proportions ensure stability in the roughest seas. Its three-deck structure provides optimal space for the cargo it must carry. The single window offers just enough light without compromising structural integrity. Every measurement reflects the perfect engineering of its divine architect. Noah begins gathering materials immediately. His sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, join Japheth despite their lingering doubts about the project's necessity. They fell trees in the distant groves and drag massive logs across miles of rough terrain. Neighbors watch with amusement as the strange family stockpiles enough wood to build a small city. Word of the ark spreads quickly through local communities. People journey from distant settlements to witness the bizarre construction project. Some come to mock, others to satisfy curiosity. A few arrive hoping to profit by selling tools and supplies to the eccentric prophet. None take his warnings seriously. The work proceeds slowly but steadily. Noah and his family learn carpentry skills through trial and error. Their hands blister and their backs ache as they shape each beam and plank. The ark takes form, timber by timber, joint by joint, season by season. What begins as scattered piles of wood gradually becomes a massive hull rising from the earth. Local craftsmen occasionally offer assistance, though more from professional curiosity than genuine belief. They marvel at the vessel's enormous scale while questioning its purpose. "Where will you sail it?" they ask with barely concealed laughter. "The nearest sea is hundreds of miles away." Noah explains patiently, but his words fall on deaf ears. The pitch application takes months to complete. Every surface must be covered inside and out, every joint sealed against the coming waters. The work is messy and exhausting, but Noah knows that a single leak could doom his family and the precious cargo they will carry. He inspects every inch multiple times, applying additional layers wherever needed. As the ark nears completion, its true scale becomes undeniable. The finished vessel stretches longer than a line of 50 houses. Its height exceeds the tallest buildings in nearby cities. The massive hull casts shadows that move across the landscape like sundials marking the passage of time. Divine instructions extend beyond mere construction. God reveals the ark's deeper purpose as a floating temple, a sanctuary where his presence will dwell during the coming judgment. The arrangement of rooms follows sacred patterns. The placement of the door echoes ancient symbols of salvation. Every element serves both practical and spiritual functions. The completed ark stands as a sermon made of wood and pitch. Its very existence proclaims the coming flood more powerfully than any spoken warning. Those who see it cannot claim ignorance of God's intentions. The massive vessel rises from the earth like a prophecy in 3 dimensions, impossible to ignore or explain away. Yet most who encounter the ark simply shake their heads and walk away. They return to their routines and pleasures, their violence and corruption. The great ship becomes part of their landscape, as familiar and overlooked as the hills and trees around it. They adapt to its presence without accepting its message. Noah stands before his completed work with mixed emotions. Pride in faithful obedience mingles with sadness at humanity's stubborn blindness. The ark represents years of backbreaking labor, but also the approaching end of the world as he has known it. Soon this wooden vessel will become the boundary between life and death for every creature on earth. The time draws near. The animals will come soon, drawn by instincts placed within them by their Creator. Then the door will close, sealed by divine hands. The rains will begin. The fountains of the deep will break open. And the ark that seems so solid and permanent will become humanity's last hope floating on the waters of judgment. The last 120 years, countdown to judgment. The number burns itself into Noah's consciousness like fire on parchment, 120 years. The Creator has set a limit to his patience, a boundary to his longing for human repentance. Divine mercy will not strive with mankind forever. The countdown has begun. Noah emerges from his encounter with God carrying this terrible knowledge like a stone in his chest. 120 years feels both impossibly long and frighteningly short. Long enough for multiple generations to be born, grow old, and pass away, short enough that the end feels real, imminent, certain. He begins preaching with new urgency. The early years pass slowly. Noah's warnings seem distant and theoretical to those who hear them. A flood that will cover the highest mountains, water falling from the sky for weeks without stopping. The idea strikes most listeners as absurd fantasy. They have never seen rain that lasts more than a few days. The concept of worldwide destruction lies beyond their experience or imagination. Children born after the countdown begins grow to adulthood knowing Noah as the strange old man who talks about water and death. They inherit their parents' skepticism along with their names and property. Generation by generation, the warning becomes more familiar and less frightening. What once seemed urgent now feels routine. Yet Noah never stops proclaiming the coming judgment. His voice grows hoarser with age, but his message remains clear and constant. He stands in marketplaces and at city gates, describing visions of drowning cities and floating corpses. People hurry past with uncomfortable glances. Children dare each other to get close enough to hear his words. The world around Noah continues its descent into darkness. New forms of violence emerge as human creativity applies itself to destruction. The giants grow bolder in their oppression, establishing kingdoms built on terror and slavery. Secret cults spring up, worshiping demons and practicing unspeakable rituals. Each passing year brings fresh evidence of humanity's corruption. Technology advances while morality declines. Metalworkers forge increasingly sophisticated weapons. Architects design temples dedicated to false gods. Musicians compose songs that celebrate cruelty and mock divine authority. Human ingenuity serves every purpose except the one for which it was given. Noah's own extended family provides a painful example of humanity's stubborn rebellion. Cousins and nephews who once respected his wisdom now avoid his presence. Family gatherings become uncomfortable affairs where his warnings create awkward silences. Some relatives begin openly questioning his sanity as the years pass without visible signs of the promised flood. The construction of the ark provides a visible timeline for the countdown. Each year brings measurable progress on the massive vessel. Neighbors watch its growth with a mixture of fascination and amusement. If Noah's really been working on that thing for 20 years, they joke, maybe he'll finish it in another 100. Their laughter echoes across the construction site. Halfway through the countdown period, a new generation takes leadership in the surrounding communities. These younger leaders have grown up hearing Noah's warnings and find them even more ridiculous than their parents did. They implement policies designed to limit his preaching, claiming he disturbs public order and frightens children. Noah continues speaking anyway. The world's population swells as the decades pass. Cities expand into sprawling metropolises filled with every form of human achievement and degradation. Trade routes connect distant civilizations, spreading both prosperity and corruption across continents. The earth groans under the weight of billions of people, most of whom have never heard Noah's name. Natural disasters occasionally remind people of their vulnerability. Earthquakes topple buildings and reshape coastlines. Droughts parch vast regions, while flash floods destroy towns built too close to rivers. But these local catastrophes only reinforce most people's belief that truly global destruction remains impossible. They rebuild in the same locations and resume their old patterns. Noah ages visibly under the burden of his knowledge and calling. His hair turns white as mountains snow. His face develops deep lines carved by decades of sorrow over humanity's fate. Yet his physical strength remains extraordinary, sustained by divine purpose and the enormous labor required to complete the ark. The final decades bring a strange acceleration to human corruption. As if sensing the approaching end, people abandon even the pretense of morality. Laws become suggestions. Justice becomes a commodity sold to the highest bidder. The strong prey upon the weak without shame or consequence. Evil parades openly in the streets while good hides in shadowed corners. Religious observance among Seth's descendants dwindles to almost nothing. The few families who still remember their heritage practice their faith in secret, fearing persecution from the increasingly dominant culture of violence and rebellion. The knowledge of God that once passed from father to son like precious inheritance now survives only in scattered households. Noah's preaching evolves during the final years, where once he proclaimed distant judgment, now he speaks of immediate consequences. His warnings carry the weight of approaching fulfillment. Those who hear him can detect something different in his voice, a certainty that makes even the boldest mockers slightly uncomfortable. The ark nears completion as the countdown approaches its end. The massive vessel dominates the landscape like a wooden mountain. Its presence can no longer be dismissed or ignored. Even those who refuse to believe Noah's message must acknowledge the reality of his preparation. Something is coming, even if they cannot imagine what it might be. Young people who barely remember a time before the ark's construction begin asking their elders uncomfortable questions. Why would anyone build such a thing unless they truly believed the flood was coming? What if the crazy old preacher actually knows something they don't? But these doubts remain whispered conversations, not public declarations. The final year arrives with ominous signs. Weather patterns shift in ways that puzzle experienced farmers. Animals exhibit strange behaviors, gathering in unusual places and showing agitation for no apparent reason. The natural world seems to sense approaching catastrophe even when human hearts remain hardened against the truth. Noah's last sermons carry the finality of closing doors. He describes the coming flood not as a distant possibility, but as an immediate reality already set in motion in the heavenly places. His words no longer invite repentance, but pronounce inevitable judgment. The time for turning back has passed. The countdown reaches its conclusion. The rains will soon begin. The gathering, animals, supplies, and scorn. The first animals arrive on an ordinary Tuesday morning, appearing at Noah's property like uninvited guests who somehow know exactly where they belong. A pair of wolves emerges from the eastern forest, neither hunting nor fleeing, simply walking with purpose toward the massive ark. Noah watches in wonder as the predators ignore nearby livestock, their attention focused entirely on the wooden vessel that will soon become their sanctuary. Word spreads quickly through neighboring settlements. People abandon their morning routines to witness the strange procession of creatures converging on Noah's land. Families pack midday meals and bring their children to watch the spectacle. What begins as curious observation soon transforms into carnival-like entertainment. The diversity of arriving animals defies all natural explanation. Desert creatures appear alongside forest dwellers. Mountain goats descend from high peaks while fish swim up rivers they have never navigated before. Birds fly in formation toward the ark from directions where no such species has ever been observed. Each animal moves with supernatural certainty toward its appointed destination. Noah and his family work frantically to accommodate their unexpected guests. The ark's interior rooms must be prepared for inhabitants with vastly different needs. Carnivores require separation from their natural prey. Creatures from tropical climates need protection from cold drafts. Birds of different species must be housed where their territorial instincts will not create conflict. Local merchants quickly recognize an opportunity for profit. They arrive with carts full of grain, dried fruits, and preserved meats. Their prices reflect the unusual circumstances and captive market. Noah pays without complaint, knowing that his family's survival depends on adequate provisions for what may be a very long voyage. Divine instructions include feeding responsibilities along with shelter. The clean animals arrive in groups of 7, a sight that confirms the supernatural nature of the gathering. Cattle, sheep, goats, and deer cluster around the ark in neat family groups, as if organized by an invisible shepherd. The mathematical precision of their arrangement impresses even skeptical observers. Someone or something clearly orchestrates this remarkable assembly. Children dare each other to approach the wild animals, amazed to discover that fierce predators show no interest in attacking. Lions lie peacefully beside lambs without displaying any hunting instincts. Bears ignore nearby humans completely, their attention fixed on the ark. Venomous snakes slither past barefoot toddlers without striking. The natural order seems suspended. Adult spectators offer increasingly creative explanations for the phenomenon. Some suggest that Noah has trained the animals using secret techniques learned from ancient books. Others propose that the beasts are actually elaborate constructions made by skilled craftsmen. A few whisper about witchcraft or demonic influence. None seriously consider the possibility of divine intervention. The logistics of animal care quickly overwhelm Noah's small family. They construct temporary pens and shelters around the ark to house creatures awaiting their turn to board. Fresh water must be constantly supplied. Different types of food must be gathered for animals with specialized diets. Waste removal becomes a full-time occupation requiring careful planning and backbreaking labor. As days pass, the animal gathering expands beyond anything observers thought possible. Species they have never seen before appear as if summoned from the ends of the earth. Exotic birds with brilliant plumage perch alongside common sparrows. Massive elephants lumber toward the ark while tiny insects swarm in organized clouds above them. The sheer scale of the assembly begins to trouble even the most determined skeptics. Rough counts suggest thousands upon thousands of creatures converging on Noah's property. The logistics of housing and feeding such numbers staggers the imagination. How can one wooden vessel, however large, accommodate such diversity and quantity of life? Noah moves through the chaos with calm purpose, as if following a detailed plan invisible to others. He directs the construction of additional feeding stations and water troughs. He organizes the boarding process to minimize stress and conflict among different species. His sons work alongside him, their earlier doubts gradually replaced by amazement at the magnitude of what they witness. The mockery of observers takes on increasingly bitter tones as the evidence of divine intervention becomes undeniable. Those who cannot explain the gathering through natural means attack Noah's character instead. They spread rumors about his sanity and question his motives. Some suggest he plans to sell the animals for enormous profits once people tire of the spectacle. Religious leaders from nearby communities arrive to investigate the disturbance. They examine the animals carefully, searching for evidence of trickery or deception. Finding none, they declare the gathering to be a sign of divine displeasure with Noah's presumptuous claims. God would never truly destroy the world, they insist. This display merely demonstrates the consequences of false prophecy. The boarding process begins as the ark's interior preparations near completion. Noah guides pairs and groups of animals up the massive ramp he has constructed. The creatures enter willingly, even eagerly, as if the wooden vessel represents safety rather than confinement. Each species finds its designated area without confusion or conflict. Observers watch the boarding with mixed emotions. The spectacle provides endless entertainment, but something about the organized procession disturbs comfortable assumptions about reality. If Noah can somehow summon animals from across the earth, what other impossible claims might prove true? The thought creates an uncomfortable tension between amusement and anxiety. The final groups of animals arrive as the ark nears capacity. These late arrivals often represent the most exotic and mysterious creatures, species that exist only in distant legends or travelers' tales. Their presence confirms that the gathering extends far beyond local wildlife to encompass all life on Earth. As the last creatures board the ark, a strange silence settles over the assembly area. The carnival atmosphere evaporates as observers realize they are witnessing something unprecedented in human history. The massive vessel now houses representatives of every kind of life, from the largest mammals to the smallest insects. The gathering is complete. Noah stands at the ark's entrance, looking out over the crowd of spectators who have watched his preparations with such amusement. His weathered face shows profound sadness rather than triumph. These people, his neighbors and relatives, will soon face the judgment they have mocked for so many years. The animals are safe. Humanity's fate remains in its own hands. The final week. Doors shut by God. 7 days stretch before Noah like an endless bridge between two worlds. The animals have found their places within the ark's carefully planned interior. Provisions fill every available storage area. His family stands ready to begin the strangest voyage in human history. Yet the promised flood remains only a promise, hidden beyond the horizon of sight and faith. The massive door stands open like an invitation waiting for final guests. Noah looks out across the gathering crowd with eyes that have seen too much sorrow. Neighbors who mocked his work for decades now press closer to the ark, their curiosity transforming into something approaching concern. The presence of every animal on earth creates questions that comfortable skepticism can no longer answer. Divine instructions echo in Noah's memory with crystal clarity. 7 days of waiting, 7 days of final opportunity, 7 days for humanity to witness the completed ark and choose their response. The Creator's patience extends even to these last moments, offering salvation to any willing to step through the open door. The first day passes in strange quiet. Animals settle into their new quarters with supernatural calm. Natural enemies rest peacefully in adjacent pens. Predators ignore nearby prey with the same indifference they might show to rocks or trees. The normal patterns of life seem suspended within the ark's wooden walls. Local leaders arrive to inspect the remarkable vessel. They tour the 3 decks with growing amazement at the careful organization of space and resources. Every room serves a specific purpose. Every creature has adequate shelter and food. The engineering challenges of housing such diversity appear solved through wisdom beyond human understanding. Yet even faced with overwhelming evidence, most visitors find reasons to dismiss Noah's warnings. The ark proves his skill as a builder, they concede, but not his claims about divine revelation. Perhaps he intends to establish a new form of entertainment, they speculate. Perhaps he hopes to impress traveling merchants with his collection of exotic animals. Any explanation seems more reasonable than accepting the possibility of worldwide destruction. The second day brings subtle changes in weather patterns. Clouds gather in formations that experienced farmers find troubling. Winds shift directions more frequently than normal. The air carries an electric tension that makes animals restless and humans uncomfortable. Nature itself seems to hold its breath in anticipation. Noah spends these days in constant prayer and preparation. He reviews the arrangement of supplies one final time. He checks the security of animal enclosures. He ensures that water containers remain filled and food stores remain accessible. Every detail matters when survival depends on careful planning and divine protection. His family moves through their final preparations with growing solemnity. The reality of their situation becomes undeniable as the ark's door remains the only connection to the outside world. Soon that portal will close forever, separating them from everyone they have ever known. The weight of being chosen for survival brings both gratitude and grief. The third day delivers more ominous signs. Small earthquakes shake the ground around the ark. Springs that have flowed consistently for generations begin to bubble and surge with unusual force. Deep underground, the fountains of the great deep stir like sleeping giants preparing to wake. Crowds continue gathering around the ark throughout the week. Some come seeking answers to questions they cannot voice. Others arrive hoping to witness the moment when Noah's predictions prove false. A few bring provisions and tools, as if considering last-minute requests to join the strange voyage. But none take the final step across the threshold. The fourth day passes with increasing tension. Weather patterns become impossible to ignore. Clouds mass on every horizon like armies preparing for battle. The pressure in the air makes breathing difficult. Animals throughout the region exhibit behavior that defies all normal patterns. Even domestic creatures seem agitated and fearful. Noah delivers his final sermons during these last days. His words carry the authority of fulfilled prophecy and approaching vindication. The ark stands behind him like a three-dimensional sermon, proof that divine warnings translate into physical reality. Yet his messages focus less on judgment than on invitation. The door remains open. Salvation remains possible. The fifth day brings the first drops of rain, light at first, barely more than mist carried on strange winds. But those who know weather patterns recognize something unnatural in these early droplets. They fall upward as often as down, defying gravity itself. The normal boundaries between earth and sky begin to dissolve. Throughout the week, Noah watches the faces of those who visit the ark. He searches for signs of conviction, hints of repentance, evidence that divine warnings have penetrated hardened hearts. Occasionally, he glimpses fear or uncertainty in someone's eyes. But fear of consequences differs from genuine change of heart. and the door remains untested by genuine seekers. The sixth day arrives with unmistakable signs of approaching catastrophe. The ground trembles constantly now. New springs appear overnight, gushing water from depths no one has ever explored. The sky takes on colors that have no names, shifting between blues and greens and purples that exist nowhere in nature's normal palette. Noah's extended family makes final visits during these last days. Cousins and nephews who've avoided him for years now seek last conversations. They ask careful questions about the ark's construction and purpose. Some inquire about space for additional passengers, but when Noah explains the requirements of faith and repentance, they retreat into comfortable skepticism. The seventh day dawns with supernatural stillness. No birds sing, no insects buzz. Even the wind holds its breath as creation waits for the next movement in the cosmic drama. The gathered crowds speak in whispers, as if loud voices might trigger something better left undisturbed. As evening approaches, Noah stands in the ark's doorway for the last time. The familiar landscape spreads before him, filled with people who have shared his world for centuries. Tomorrow, this vista will exist only in memory. These faces will disappear beneath waters that have never known such depth or fury. The moment arrives without fanfare or announcement. An invisible hand begins moving the massive door. Noah feels rather than sees the divine presence that seals their fate. The portal swings closed with deliberate finality, its sound echoing through the ark's interior like the closing of a tomb or the opening of a new world. Outside, the crowd watches in stunned silence as the great door settles into position. No human hand guided its movement. No earthly mechanism controlled its motion. The seal forms perfectly, as if the wood itself flows together like liquid. The last connection between the ark and the old world disappears forever. Darkness settles over the ark and its passengers. But this is not the darkness of night. This is the darkness of endings and beginnings, of judgment and mercy, of death and resurrection all wrapped together in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Tomorrow, the rains will begin. Tonight belongs to waiting and prayer. The fountains break. The flood begins. The earth splits open with a sound like creation running backward. Deep beneath Noah's feet, pressures that have built for centuries finally overcome the barriers that have contained them. The great fountains of the deep explode upward with violence that shakes the foundations of mountains. Water that has slept in darkness since the world's beginning erupts into daylight with the fury of unleashed eternity. Noah feels the ark shudder as the ground beneath it transforms from solid earth to churning liquid. The massive vessel lurches sideways, then rights itself as buoyancy takes over from gravity. What seemed impossibly heavy yesterday now floats like a cork on the emerging chaos. The transition from landcraft to seagoing vessel happens in moments that feel like hours. Above, the windows of heaven open with their own terrible beauty. Rain falls in sheets so thick they blur the boundary between air and water. But this is not the gentle precipitation that nourishes crops and fills streams. These are torrents that strike the earth like liquid hammers, each drop carrying the weight of divine wrath and the promise of cleansing. The sound overwhelms everything. Water crashes against water in an endless symphony of destruction. The earth groans under liquid weight it was never designed to bear. Buildings collapse with sounds like thunder. Trees snap like twigs in the grip of currents that appear from nowhere and flow toward everywhere. Inside the ark, Noah's family huddles together in the central room. The vessel rocks and pitches as forces beyond imagination toss it between competing currents. Yet the animals remain strangely calm, as if divine peace surrounds them even amid the chaos. They seem to understand that safety lies not in stillness, but in surrender to the forces carrying them toward an uncertain future. The first day brings confusion and terror to the outside world. People climb hills and trees, seeking higher ground as water levels rise with impossible speed. What begins as ankle-deep inconvenience becomes waist-high emergency within hours. Communities that have existed for generations disappear beneath expanding lakes that have no shores. Those who mocked Noah's warnings now remember them with growing desperation. They pound on the ark's sealed door with fists and stones and tools, screaming for entrance they dismissed when it was freely offered. But the door remains closed, sealed by the same divine hand that controls the fountains and the rain. Mercy's season has passed. Justice's time has begun. The giants who ruled through strength and terror find their power useless against the rising waters. Their massive frames, once sources of intimidation, now become liabilities in a world turned liquid. They wade through flooded valleys like moving islands, but even their great height cannot provide permanent safety when the waters rise without limit. Cities perish in stages that unfold over days and weeks. First, the lower districts flood, driving residents toward higher ground. Then the markets and temples disappear beneath expanding seas. Finally, the highest towers and palaces submit to depths that swallow human achievement as if it never existed. Centuries of civilization vanish into liquid oblivion. The corrupted descendants of Cain watch their legacy dissolve in real time. The weapons they forged cannot cut through water. The walls they built cannot hold back the flood. The songs they composed become final screams, echoing across waters that carry no memory of human accomplishment. Their 77-fold vengeance proves powerless against divine judgment that multiplies beyond counting. Animals outside the ark face their fate with the dignity that has always marked their kind. Domestic creatures follow their human families to higher ground, loyal even in catastrophe. Wild beasts abandon their territories and instincts, gathering in strange alliances on shrinking islands of earth. But the waters rise faster than hope, and one by one the islands disappear. Forests that have grown for thousands of years become floating graveyards of broken wood and drowned life. Mountains disappear beneath waters that continue climbing toward heights no flood has ever reached. The Earth's familiar geography becomes unrecognizable as familiar landmarks sink into expanding oceans. The Watchers who began this cycle of corruption face judgment alongside their human victims. Their supernatural strength cannot lift them above waters that rise higher than the clouds. Their forbidden knowledge offers no escape from the consequences of their rebellion. They who taught humans to pierce the veil between dimensions find themselves trapped in a reality that offers no refuge. Noah peers through the ark's single window at a world transformed beyond recognition. The landscape of his childhood exists now only in memory. The communities where he preached for decades have become temporary islands, shrinking toward extinction. The people who shaped his life struggle in waters that show no mercy to righteous or wicked alike. Yet the flood carries its own strange mercy. Death comes more swiftly than the violence that preceded it. The corruption that spread like disease through human hearts finds itself diluted in waters too vast for contamination. Evil that seemed eternal proves temporary when faced with divine power that knows no limits. The ark rides the chaos with supernatural stability. Currents that could crush mountains merely lift the wooden vessel toward its appointed destination. Waves that tower higher than hills pass beneath its hull like gentle swells. The same divine hand that sealed the door now guides their passage through waters that follow no earthly maps. As night falls on the first day of judgment, Noah's family listens to voices calling across the waters. Some cry for help. Others curse the God who warned them through his faithful servant. A few sing hymns or recite prayers as they face their final moments. The sounds carry far in the still air above the endless sea. Testimonies to human nature revealed in its last extremity. The ark continues its journey into a future none of them can imagine. Behind them lies a world that will never return. Ahead waits the possibility of new beginnings built on foundations washed clean by judgment and prepared by grace. The fountains of the deep continue pouring forth their ancient burden. The windows of heaven maintain their steady downpour. The flood that began in divine sorrow will continue until divine purpose reaches its completion. But that completion lies days and weeks ahead. Tonight the waters rise, carrying with them the dreams and nightmares of a world that forgot its creator until remembering became too late. The flood has begun. The old world ends. The new world waits to be born from the chaos of judgment and the hope of mercy, flowing together in waters deeper than human understanding. 40 days, the judgment unfolds. The rain continues without pause, each drop a liquid reminder of divine determination to cleanse the earth completely. 40 days stretch ahead like an endless corridor of judgment, each one bringing new revelations of the flood's comprehensive power. The rhythm of falling water becomes the soundtrack of the old world's funeral, and the New World's distant birth song. Noah marks each day on a wooden tablet, recording the steady progress of divine justice. Day 2 brings water levels that swallow the tallest buildings. Day 3 erases entire cities from view. By day 7, only the highest hills remain as temporary refuges for the last survivors of humanity's rebellion. The mathematics of rising water allow no room for false hope. Inside the ark, life takes on patterns that will define the months ahead. Noah's family develops routines for feeding the animals, cleaning their quarters, and maintaining the vessel's systems. The work provides purpose amid uncertainty and stability amid chaos. Each completed task represents a small victory over the overwhelming nature of their situation. The animals adapt to their floating sanctuary with remarkable grace. Natural enemies rest peacefully in adjacent stalls. Predators accept vegetarian diets without complaint. The supernatural peace that filled Eden before the fall now fills the ark during judgment. God's presence transforms the wooden vessel into a floating temple where his will reigns supreme. Outside the sealed windows, the sounds of the dying world gradually diminish. Voices calling for help become fewer each day. The crashes of collapsing structures fade into memory. Even the cries of drowning animals eventually cease, leaving only the endless percussion of rain on water and the gentle motion of currents carrying the ark toward unknown shores. The middle days of the 40 bring the most profound isolation. No signs of life appear beyond the ark's wooden walls. The earth has become an alien landscape of endless water stretching to every horizon. Noah's family realizes they may be the only conscious observers of this cosmic reset, witnesses to the end of everything they once knew. Yet the isolation carries its own revelations. Freed from the distractions of human society, Noah's family rediscovers conversation and companionship. They share stories of the world before the flood, preserving memories that will become the foundation stones of future civilization. The ark becomes a library of human experience, floating safely above the waters of judgment. The giants meet their end during these middle days. Their massive strength, which once terrorized entire regions, proves useless against rising waters that respect no earthly power. One by one, the hybrid offspring of rebellious angels disappear beneath waves that climb higher than their greatest reach. Their corruption, which poisoned the earth for generations, dissolves in waters too pure for contamination. Divine timing reveals itself through the flood's progression. 40 days and nights of rain match the 40 days Moses will spend on Mount Sinai. The 40 years Israel will wander in the wilderness. The 40 days Jesus will fast in the desert before beginning his ministry. God measures his great works in patterns that echo through eternity, each event reflecting eternal truths in temporal circumstances. The water reaches its highest levels as the 40th day approaches. Mountains that pierced clouds for millennia now lie fathoms below the surface. The highest peaks of the earth rest beneath depths that would crush any vessel not protected by divine preservation. Only the ark rides safely above waters that have swallowed every other trace of the world that was. Noah climbs to the ark's highest level and peers through the single window at a transformed creation. Where once diverse landscapes painted the earth in countless colors, now only endless blue stretches to meet the sky. The familiar geography of his lifetime exists only in memory and divine promise. This is the world remade, washed clean, prepared for the fresh start that will follow judgment's completion. The animals sense the approaching change before human minds can grasp it. Their supernatural calm deepens as the 40th day dawns. Birds that have not sung since entering the ark begin quiet melodies. Mammals that have remained motionless start gentle movements. Even the most exotic creatures show signs of anticipation, as if they know their long confinement approaches its midpoint. The final hours of rain carry their own significance. Each drop falls with the weight of completed purpose. The cleansing that began 40 days ago reaches its intended conclusion. Evil has been washed from the earth as thoroughly as dirt from a soiled garment. The corruption that seemed permanent proves temporary when faced with divine determination. As the 40th day ends, the rain stops with the same suddenness that marked its beginning. The silence that follows feels profound after weeks of endless precipitation. Noah's family stands together in the ark's main chamber, listening to the absence of sound that marks the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The judgment phase has concluded. The restoration phase awaits. The waters that rose so dramatically now begin their slow recession. Mountains start their gradual emergence from depths that held them captive for months. Islands appear like birthing islands, first as tiny specks on the horizon, then as substantial landmasses crowned with mud and debris. The earth begins its resurrection from the grave of judgment waters. But this process will take time, measured in seasons rather than days. The ark continues floating above a world still largely submerged. Noah's family settles in for the longer journey ahead, knowing that dry land remains months away. They have survived the destruction of everything familiar. Now they must navigate the uncertain waters between judgment and restoration. The 40 days of rain become the foundation story for every culture that descends from Noah's family. Countless variations will emerge as humanity spreads across the renewed earth. But the core truth remains constant. Divine justice fell like rain until the earth was cleansed, and divine mercy preserved a remnant to begin again. A new world. Waters recede. The silence feels heavier than the sound of rain ever did. After 40 days of endless drumming on the ark's roof, the sudden absence of precipitation creates a stillness that seems to echo in Noah's bones. The world has been washed clean, but the cleansing waters must now find their way back to appointed boundaries before life can resume its ancient patterns. Months pass in gentle rocking motion as currents carry the ark across seas that cover continents. The massive vessel becomes a world unto itself, complete with its own seasons and rhythms. Noah's family learns patience on a scale they never imagined possible. Time moves differently when surrounded by endless water under endless sky. The animals maintain their supernatural peace throughout these long months of waiting. Lions rest beside lambs without hunger. Wolves show no interest in nearby sheep. Snakes coil peacefully in corners without striking at passing mice. The ark preserves not just animal life, but the original harmony between species, a floating reminder of paradise before the fall. Noah climbs daily to the window, searching the horizon for signs of emerging land. Week after week brings only more water, stretching unbroken to every edge of sight. The familiar landmarks of his former world remain hidden beneath depths that seem permanent. Sometimes he wonders if God intends for them to live forever on this floating sanctuary. But divine promises anchor hope more firmly than any earthly foundation. The same voice that commanded the ark's construction also promised its eventual rest. The Creator who sent the flood will also command its retreat. Noah holds these assurances close during the darkest moments when doubt whispers that the waters will never recede. The first sign comes as winter yields to spring in the ark's enclosed world. A subtle change in the vessel's motion suggests shifting currents below. The gentle rocking that has defined their existence for months gives way to occasional jolts and bumps, as if the ark encounters obstacles that were not there before. Hidden mountains begin asserting their presence beneath the surface. One morning, Noah awakens to find the ark resting at an angle, its massive hull settled against something solid for the first time since the door was sealed. The mountains of Ararat have caught their floating sanctuary like patient hands reaching up from the depths. The long journey through endless waters has reached its first milestone. Yet even grounded against mountain peaks, the ark remains surrounded by water stretching to every horizon. Only the highest summits pierce the surface like islands in an infinite sea. The familiar shape of continents lies far below, waiting for waters to retreat to levels that will reveal their sleeping forms once more. The recession happens gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. Water levels that rose so dramatically during the 40 days now fall with stately slowness, as if the earth itself must learn to breathe again after its long submersion. Each day brings subtle changes that accumulate into visible transformation over weeks and months. Noah's family watches the slow emergence of the world with the fascination of children witnessing their first sunrise. Peaks that began as tiny islands gradually reveal shoulders and foothills. Valleys remain flooded long after ridgelines break the surface. The new geography appears piece by piece, like a vast puzzle assembling itself through divine patience. The animals sense the approaching change in their blood and bones. Birds become restless, their instincts stirring toward migration patterns that have waited months for expression. Mammals pace their enclosures with growing energy. Even the most docile creatures show signs of anticipation, as if they know their time of confinement draws toward its end. But Noah waits for divine permission rather than trusting his own observations. The same God who sealed them into the ark must release them from it. Human wisdom might judge the time right for departure, but divine wisdom sees factors beyond mortal comprehension. Safety lies in obedience rather than presumption. The recession accelerates as spring advances towards summer. Hilltops that took weeks to emerge now reveal entire slopes in matter of days. River valleys begin draining like enormous bathtubs, exposing muddy bottoms that have not seen sunlight for over a year. The earth awakens from its watery sleep with increasing speed. Wildlife that survived in mountain refuges begins venturing down toward lower elevations as the waters retreat. Insects emerge from hidden places where they waited out the flood. Birds that rode the crisis in high mountain caves spread their wings over landscapes transformed beyond recognition. Life proves more persistent and adaptable than the corruption that made judgment necessary. Noah releases a raven first, watching the black bird disappear into the vast sky above endless waters. The raven finds its own way, adapting to the flooded world with the flexibility of a scavenger. It does not return, having discovered sufficient resources in the strange new landscape to survive independently. 7 days later, Noah sends out a dove, a creature more dependent on human civilization and specific environmental conditions. The dove returns that evening, having found no suitable place to rest its feet. The waters still cover too much of the earth for creatures that require particular habitats and food sources. Another week passes before Noah releases the dove again. This time, the bird returns with an olive leaf in its beak, fresh evidence that trees have begun emerging from their watery grave. Somewhere beyond the horizon, vegetation has started the long process of recovery. The earth remembers its purpose and begins fulfilling it once more. The olive leaf becomes a symbol that will echo through human history, a sign of peace between heaven and earth. Evidence that judgment gives way to mercy. Proof that life persists beyond destruction and finds ways to flourish again in circumstances that seem impossible. The tiny green leaf carries more hope than all the treasures of the drowned world. 7 more days, and the dove flies away without returning. It has found suitable habitat in the emerging world, places where life can establish new patterns and relationships. The bird's absence signals that the time of waiting nears its end. The new world has progressed far enough to support the diversity of life preserved in the ark. Noah removes the ark's covering and looks out upon a landscape both familiar and completely changed. The basic structure of mountains and valleys remains, but everything else has been transformed. New rivers carve different courses through rearranged terrain. Forests that stood for millennia have vanished, leaving spaces for new growth to claim. The earth has been reborn through water and divine purpose. Yet still Noah waits. The same patience that sustained him through decades of ark building now keeps him from presumptuous haste. God will speak when the time comes for departure. Human eagerness must yield to divine timing. The new world has appeared, but the old world's last lesson involves trusting God completely for guidance into whatever comes next. The covenant, rainbow, and sacrifice. The voice comes with the gentle authority Noah remembers from their first conversation decades ago. The same divine presence that commanded the ark's construction now grants permission for departure. The season of confinement has ended. The time for new beginnings has arrived. Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Noah's hands shake as he works to unseal the door that has protected them for over a year. The mechanism operates smoothly despite long disuse, as if divine preservation extended even to hinges and latches. Sunlight streams through the widening gap, carrying scents of earth and growing things that smell both familiar and impossibly fresh. The animals understand before the door fully opens. Birds gather near the entrance, their songs creating a chorus of anticipation. Larger creatures move restlessly in their stalls, sensing the approaching freedom. Even the most docile animals show signs of excitement, as if they remember instincts that have waited patiently for this moment of release. Noah steps onto dry ground for the first time in months that felt like years. The earth beneath his feet feels solid and eternal, though he knows now how quickly solid things can become liquid under divine command. His family follows, blinking in sunlight that seems brighter than they remember, breathing air that tastes like hope and possibility. The animal exodus begins immediately. Birds explode from the ark in clouds of color and motion, their wings catching sunlight as they spiral upward into freedom. Small creatures scurry down the ramp in happy confusion, disappearing into grass and bushes with the urgency of those who have waited too long for independence. Larger animals move with more dignity but equal determination toward the new world. Pairs separate into family groups as mating instincts reassert themselves. The supernatural peace that preserved predators and prey in close quarters gradually gives way to natural relationships based on survival and reproduction. Yet, something of the ark's harmony remains, a gentleness between species that will fade but never completely disappear. Noah watches the dispersal with emotions too complex for simple description. Joy at seeing life spread across the earth mingles with sadness at the end of their unique community. Pride in faithful obedience combines with uncertainty about the future. The ark has served its purpose, but what purpose will define the years ahead? The emptied vessel behind them stands as a monument to divine faithfulness and human obedience. Its massive hull, now settled permanently against the mountainside, will weather and age into a landmark for future generations. Stories will grow around its remains, some accurate, others embellished, all pointing toward the truth of judgment survived through grace. Noah's first act in the New World reveals the spiritual foundation that will guide humanity's fresh start. He gathers stones and builds an altar, creating sacred space before constructing shelter or planting crops. The practical necessities of survival matter less than establishing proper relationship with the God who preserved them through the flood. The sacrifice that follows carries deeper meaning than any offering made before the judgment. Clean animals and birds chosen from the groups of 7 go up in smoke that rises straight into clear sky. The aroma pleases the Lord in ways that transcend physical senses, representing gratitude, worship, and commitment to walking in divine ways. God responds to Noah's sacrifice with a promise that will anchor human hope for all generations to come. Never again will the earth face destruction by flood. The seasons will continue their ancient cycles. Seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will maintain their appointed rhythms as long as the earth endures. The promise comes with a visible sign that transforms the physics of light into a message of hope. The rainbow appears as divine artwork painted across the sky, its colors bridging earth and heaven in an arc of beauty that takes the breath away. 7 distinct bands of light create a spectrum that speaks of completion, perfection, divine order restored. Noah's family stands in wonder before this first rainbow, understanding that they witness the birth of a new symbol that will comfort countless generations yet to be born. Every time storm clouds gather and rain threatens, the appearance of colored light will remind humanity that judgment has limits, that mercy triumphs over wrath, that God keeps his promises through all the changes of time. But the covenant involves reciprocity as well as divine commitment. God grants humanity expanded dominion over animal life, allowing them to eat meat as well as vegetables. This change acknowledges the harsher realities of the post-flood world while establishing humanity's responsibility for stewardship rather than exploitation. The commandment against unliving carries special significance in this new beginning. Human life, created in God's image, possesses unique value that must be protected through both divine and human justice. The violence that corrupted the pre-flood world must not be allowed to spread unchecked again. Justice becomes humanity's shared responsibility with their Creator. Noah receives these expanded responsibilities with the weight of understanding earned through unique experience. He has seen what happens when human corruption grows unchecked. He knows the terrible consequences of violence and rebellion against divine order. The new world needs wisdom that can only come from surviving the old world's judgment. The rainbow fades as clouds disperse and normal weather patterns resume. but its appearance has established a principle that will outlive mountains and seas. Divine promises once given remain forever reliable. God's word provides the only foundation stable enough for building civilization that honors both justice and mercy. As evening approaches, Noah's family gathers around a fire built from wood that grew in the world before the flood. They share food from supplies preserved in the ark, but tomorrow they will begin planting seeds and establishing new patterns of life. The transition from survival to growth has begun. The covenant extends beyond Noah's immediate family to include all their descendants yet to be born. Every human being who will ever live traces their lineage back to this moment, this promise, this rainbow sign of divine faithfulness. The new world begins not with human achievement, but with divine commitment to preserve what he has chosen to save. Yet even as they celebrate deliverance and divine promise, Noah's family carries within their hearts the knowledge that human nature itself has not changed. The same capacity for good and evil that destroyed the old world still flows in their blood. The covenant provides opportunity for better choices, not guarantee that those choices will be made. The rainbow sets in the western sky like a promise written in light across the heavens. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to walk in faithfulness or fall into rebellion. But tonight belongs to gratitude for grace received and hope for grace yet to be given. The new world has begun with divine blessing. How it develops depends on human response to divine love. The legacy of the pre-flood prophets. The stories echo through generations, like ripples spreading from stones dropped in still water. Each telling shapes the memories that will guide humanity's steps through the centuries ahead. Noah's descendants gather around evening fires to hear again the tales of those who walked with God before the world was washed clean. These are not merely stories of the past. They are maps for the future. Adam's voice whispers through the generations, carrying warnings about the cost of disobedience and the pain of separation from divine presence. His children's children learn that paradise once existed on earth and that human choices destroyed what divine love had created. The memory of the garden becomes both a wound and a hope, reminding each new generation of what was lost and what might be regained. Enoch's legacy proves most enduring of all the pre-flood prophets. His visions of coming judgment prepared Noah for the flood, but his deeper revelations about divine justice and mercy provide framework for understanding God's ways with humanity. The books attributed to his name will influence religious thought for millennia, offering glimpses of cosmic truths that transcend any single generation's experience. The Watcher's rebellion becomes a cautionary tale about the dangers of forbidden knowledge and illicit power. Parents warn their children about seeking wisdom through sources other than God himself. The corruption that began with angelic disobedience serves as a reminder that even the highest created beings can fall when they reject their proper place in divine order. Abel's innocent blood still speaks from the ground, its voice carrying forward the truth that righteousness matters more than success, that divine acceptance depends on heart condition rather than external circumstances. His sacrifice becomes the pattern for all future offerings that please God, establishing principles of worship that will guide faithful hearts through every age. Cain's mark and exile warn against the violence that destroyed the pre-flood world. His descendants' achievements in technology and culture demonstrate that human capability does not equal human wisdom. Cities and tools and weapons prove powerless against divine judgment when they serve corruption rather than justice. Seth's line preserves the knowledge of God through the dark centuries before the flood. Their choice to call upon the name of the Lord establishes the pattern of prayer and worship that sustains faith through every trial. Their oral traditions become the foundation for written scriptures that will guide future generations toward truth. The flood itself transforms from historical event into universal symbol. Every culture that descends from Noah's family carries flood stories, though details vary with telling and retelling. The core truth remains constant. Divine justice will not tolerate unlimited corruption, but divine mercy preserves a remnant to begin again when judgment has accomplished its purpose. Noah's obedience becomes the template for faith that acts on divine promises even when those promises seem impossible. His willingness to spend decades building an ark far from any sea demonstrates the kind of trust that pleases God. Future generations will look to his example when called to follow divine guidance that contradicts human wisdom. The Rainbow Covenant provides hope that outlasts every storm. Children learn to watch for colored light after rain, remembering that divine promises remain reliable even when circumstances seem threatening. The simple beauty of refracted sunlight carries profound assurance that judgment has limits and mercy endures forever. But the pre-flood prophets also leave sobering reminders about human nature. The same capacity for evil that corrupted the ancient world flows in the veins of Noah's descendants. Technology advances, but moral challenges remain essentially unchanged. The knowledge of good and evil that began humanity's troubles continues to present choices between divine ways and human rebellion. Religious leaders in every age draw upon pre-flood examples to explain the balance between divine patience and divine justice. God's willingness to wait 120 years for repentance demonstrates his desire that none should perish. Yet the eventual arrival of judgment proves that mercy has boundaries and patience has limits. Philosophers and teachers use the flood narrative to explore questions about suffering, justice, and divine sovereignty. Why do the righteous suffer alongside the wicked? How can a loving God permit such destruction? The pre-flood prophets provide partial answers while acknowledging that some questions exceed human understanding. Artists and musicians find inspiration in the dramatic contrasts of the pre-flood world. Paradise lost, innocence corrupted, giants walking the earth, righteous men preaching to deaf ears, divine intervention rescuing a faithful remnant. These themes appear in countless works that attempt to capture the grandeur and tragedy of humanity's first chapter. The scientific mind finds in flood geology evidence of catastrophic change that shaped the Earth's surface. Mountains rising from ocean floors, fossils buried in sedimentary layers, water-carved canyons cutting through solid rock. The physical world bears witness to forces that reshaped continents and relocated seas. Prophets in later ages see patterns connecting the pre-flood world to their own times. As in the days of Noah, people eat and drink, marry and give in marriage, building and planting as if their world will last forever. Divine warnings go unheeded until judgment arrives like a flood that catches the unprepared. The promise of future restoration echoes themes established before the flood. The new heavens and new earth that conclude biblical prophecy mirror the renewed world that emerged from the judgment waters. Paradise lost becomes paradise regained when divine purposes reach their final fulfillment. Yet the most important legacy may be the simplest truth of all. God preserves those who walk with him through faith. Whether facing flood or famine, persecution or prosperity, the faithful find in the pre-flood prophets examples of trust that overcomes circumstances. Divine faithfulness proves more reliable than human strength, divine wisdom more valuable than human knowledge. The stories continue echoing forward through time, each generation discovering new relevance in ancient truths. The pre-flood prophets speak across millennia to hearts that face similar choices between divine ways and human rebellion. Their voices, preserved in sacred memory and holy scripture, offer guidance for navigating the eternal questions that define human existence. Until the next judgment comes and divine promises find their ultimate fulfillment, the legacy of the pre-flood prophets remains humanity's inheritance. Their warnings about corruption, their examples of faithfulness, their revelations of divine character provide foundations strong enough to support faith through every storm. The first prophecies of mankind echo still, pointing toward the day when all prophecy will be fulfilled and all questions will find their answers in the presence of the God who spoke the world into being and preserves it by his power.